Very good morning from the KTN News Center and welcome to this edition of Sunday Edition. It is Sunday, the 24th day of September 2017. We're here for the next 2 hours to take a look at some of the big political and governance stories this past week, and of course try to look out into this coming week and what will be happening. A lot happening around the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IBC, who have set a new election date on the 26th of October, changing it from the 17th of October. But how will that go down with the political players? NASA have maintained their hardline position that no reforms, no elections. Jubilee have insisted that the election has to happen as scheduled. We'll talk about all that. Of course, we'll talk about the Supreme Court decision and what this means going forward in terms of where the judiciary stands in terms of this country's governance issues, in terms of even its effect on the other elective positions from the August 8th general election. Thank you for staying with us. Let's start by taking a look at what's happening in the newspapers this Sunday morning. Let me introduce my guest this morning. I have with me, as always, Dismas Mokwa, political risk analyst. We have political analyst Hesbon Owila and Jubilee strategist Mutinda Kawemba. We missed you gentlemen last week. Karibu sana. And we have a new entrant on the show this morning. We have the Member of Parliament for Uriri in the county of Migori. That is Walter Namita. Mark Namita, sorry. Karibu sana, Mheshimiwa. All right. So let's start with this story on the Sunday Standard, the splash. Revealed inside story of NASA no poll threat. So the Sunday Standard this morning is revealing fresh details emerging on why the National Super Alliance is not keen on presidential election on the 26th of October. Jubilee insisting that the poll must be held by going to the legal timeline. So what we understand from this story is that aside from the IBC changes, Dismas, that Raila Odinga and his NASA team have been pushing for, it's that NASA hopes to force a crisis where the next election is held when Uhuru Kenyatta, in some ways, not the president. Like there's a caretaker government in place so that he does not enjoy and the incumbent's, advantage. What is your take on this?
Well, a careful reading of that story and understanding the NASA perspective, NASA has indicated that if there are not fundamental changes or reforms at IBC, then they're not going to participate in the election. So actually,
yes, that's one.
Yeah. And the ball is squarely in the court of IBC because they've given out what they consider to be the irreducible minimums. And one would expect that IBC would go the extra mile and address those issues, because the Supreme Court judgment said there were a number of illegalities and irregularities. Now, those are the two aspects that IBC is supposed to identify and address them. And if you are Raila Odinga from a NASA perspective, you'd be very naive, you'd be very stupid to actually go back to an election with the same infrastructure. You remember the definition of insanity.
Yes.
Doing things the same way and expecting different outcomes. So if Chebukati and the company are not going to implement those fundamental changes, then it's the view of NASA that they have no business going to that election.
But this was, apart from this irreducible, demands that we've had, apart from what you're saying, changes at the IBC, so that there's a difference from what happened on the 8th of August. It's like they're trying to force something else altogether, like just push their boundaries a bit more, saying that they want to ensure that there is a crisis. This is from some inside sources, according to the Sunday Standard, to make sure, for some reason, Uhuru Kenyatta does not, when they are going into that election, Uhuru Kenyatta does not enjoy the advantages of incumbency that like he has when he is now sitting president. Isn't that pushing the boundaries a bit too far?
Well, that probability does exist. And if all Kenyans know that if you don't address the NASA issues, then there's going to be a constitutional crisis, and depends on who you have a conversation with. Because from a NASA perspective, they say at the end of the 60 days, then President Kenyatta will not be in office, and the Deputy President will not be in office, then the Speaker of the National Assembly takes over in a caretaker capacity. However, the Attorney General indicates that there shall be no vacancy in that position, that President Kenyatta will be in office till he hands over to another person legally elected as a president. Now, if some insiders have then picked the information that NASA is interested in creating that constitutional crisis, either to have a caretaker administration or to have an interim president, whatever rebranding it's going to take place, why can't IBC move in a bipartisan manner, invite NASA, invite Jubilee? So those are two parties, place the issues on the table, and the issues are addressed one after the other, so that we sort out this mess. Because Jubilee would like to push in one extreme direction, NASA would like to do the same, push in one extreme direction, and then IBC is in the middle. And at the end of the day, it's Kenyans who suffer. Because as we have this election going on, the posturing, the continuous posturing by both Jubilee and NASA is compromising Kenya's national security. And it's even compromising our nation's prosperity. Because right now, most of the things have come to a standstill. Right. And our neighbors are beginning to laugh at us. Our neighbors in Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, right, who've all along seen Kenya as an economic power, the superpower in this part of the world, now they're beginning to laugh at us. And it will be important for President Kenyatta and Mr. Raila Odinga to have a round-table conversation in a manner which is very honest and address those issues. Like, for instance, the Supreme Court has made a determination in their judgment that there were illegalities and irregularities. What is so complicated in the three officers, that's the President, Raila Odinga, and Chebukati, and the commissioners, to sit and address those issues. Well, and maybe, but you know, the elephant in the room, and at some stage Kavemba would assist us in this conversation, is the Supreme Court did not find President Kenyatta guilty of any offense. It was IBC. Right. So one still wonders why Jubilee is not keen to sanitize IBC, so that if President Kenyatta wins again, his win is not going to be nullified. Because you recall, Justice Maraga, speaking on behalf of the bench, he said, if you don't address these illegalities and irregularities, and this matter is brought before us, we'll have no hesitation in annulling the same thing. So I would have expected that Mr. Kavemba and Jubilee would be very proactive. In fact, they are the ones who are supposed to be calling for a fundamental change at IBC. Right. But you know, they're not doing that, and one has to find that one very curious.
Mutinda, what's your take on this? And why are you not pushing for these reforms? Is it because you do not want to look like you're supporting the NASA's position?
Jubilee is very clear on what the Constitution says, and we are operating within that. And we are not imagining any situation where we are going to get out of the constitutional framework. So that means that we are guided by the 60 days that we need to do the repeat election. Right. And that clearly tells you that there are things that can be done with it, the short time that we have, and there are things that have to be done in the long term. And the difference between NASA and Jubilee is that Jubilee is clearly focused on the repeat election without any sideshows. And we are very clear that IBC has to rise up to the occasion and conduct an election like is acceptable, you know, going by the guidelines that were given by the Supreme Court, which of course were nothing new. It's just that they were emphasizing that we have to very strictly go by the letter and spirit of the Constitution. So that is the main difference. And that is, you know, you've said very well from the headline in the today's paper that NASA is looking at a strategy where probably we even go beyond the 60 days without doing the repeat election, so that we probably get into a crisis. Now that is the difference. And you know, you wonder, the incumbent is playing by the rules. You wonder why the opposition would want to play outside the rules, yet if the incumbent decides to play outside the rule, there would be a lot of hue and cry. So the appeal here should be that let us all play within the rules. It is very clear that whatever they are trying to anticipate, and that's why they want to get us into a crisis, is something that was not anticipated in our constitutional framework. So let us respect the ruling of the Supreme Court in all ways. Let us not just accept that bit of the ruling that favored us and yet want to play outside the other determination of the court, which was that we have to have a repeat election within the 60 days. That is where the main difference comes in.
Which do you want to play outside the rules?
Well, let me say that first on your story. I don't think NASA is actually pushing for us to go outside the constitutional framework. What we are asking, and even the things that NASA is actually asking for reform within IEBC are really standard things that is not favoring NASA or favoring Jubilee. Now, what we are saying, within the framework, without beyond the 60 days, we are ready for Jubilee anytime. We don't need to push them out, or we don't need to go beyond the 60 days to actually be on a fair ground. But if their continued incumbency is impeding the IEBC from making the institutional reforms, and that the only way that we can have the reforms is by us going within beyond the 60 days, I mean, so be it. Yeah, the ruling was actually very clear that we are going for a repeat election because of irregularities and illegalities that are actually committed. For us to actually do this, and today, yesterday, I saw the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. He's written to the EACC and CID to actually begin investigations.
Yes.
So I think right actually now, the best thing, what we would have expected actually today, is actually, people moving out of office, from Chiloba and all the other officers who are actually now under active investigations over the next 21 days.
Right.
So they really need to step down. And when they do, part of the conditions that we have actually put, which favors both of us, it's actually going to work.
Do you think it's possible to have a situation where, just in line or covered by those demands that you've made in that irreducible reforms, do you think there's a possibility of having a situation where there is a caretaker government in place, and then you go into election with Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta as just candidates? Do you think that is feasible?
Our position, even now, I mean, Uhuru does not enjoy full powers of a president as it is. I mean, Uhuru had moved from, actual incumbency to interim incumbency. The constitution is very clear. What takes you from interim incumbency to full incumbency is actually by being sworn in after an election. We have not had that. So our position, even as it is, Uhuru does not. And anything he's actually doing is actually just being him, he's under impunity. Yeah. So whether I see a position of us moving to a point where we have a caretaker government, if IEBC does not act, I mean, the constitution is very clear. Uhuru will not have the powers to sit in that particular office, and therefore we will be in a constitutional crisis. And the position will be very clear that at that particular point, the Speaker needs to act within 90 days, and we have an election.
All right. Is that the case, Hezbon? Because AG was speaking on Friday and say that Kenya is not in a constitutional crisis. The constitution does not envisage lacuna in the office of the president.
Well, from what I see it, the Constitution, the way it is written, and any other piece of law is an us. You want to interpret it in the way that is applicable to you. And I think politicians have taken this to a notch higher. They want to interpret it in a way that serves their own interests. And you'd understand what the Attorney General is talking about, that the interpretation can be made in such a way that you understand that there is a full president until another president is sworn in. But then the other interpretation is, if we had an election on 8th of August, and that election did not give us a substantive president who was sworn in, then there is a gap. And if you extend that period beyond the 60 days that the Supreme Court gave, then without any fear of contradiction, I'm looking at a situation where we will not have a substantive president. And whatever powers the president is going to enjoy, they're basically going to be, limited powers of an incumbent president.
All right.
And of course, you'd understand the narrative that now people are attributing to NASA. Any normal Kenyan would understand that the reason why we spent a lot of money, processes, systems, and everything to have the election is because we needed a credible and fair election. We didn't have that, and the court vacated that. So to say that we are going to have an election within 60 days without any substantive reforms that addresses these illegalities and irregularities, again, is shooting ourselves in the foot. And the Supreme Court made it clear that if an election is not conducted in accordance with the law, then they'll nullify it again. So do we want to put ourselves in that situation? And I want to believe that Kenyans should step back from their political affiliations. Kenyans should stop looking at things from tribal and political tinted spectacles and just ask themselves, what exactly do we need, irrespective of the date? Do we need an election that is free, fair, and credible, or we need an election because we have to have an election within 16 days?
All right. So before we move away from this and look at that order by the Director of Public Prosecutions, Dismas, what is your take on the claim by some pundits, and especially Jubilee enthusiasts that NASA is simply not ready for the election. That's why they are bringing all these distractions, as they call them.
Well, that's very good propaganda, and that has been the message right from the beginning of the year, that NASA has never been free for a free, fair, and credible election. If indeed NASA is not ready for a free, fair, and credible election, why can't you sort out the mess at IBC and sanitize the system, and then declare public, all of us gather to Uhuru Park, and then the IBC chairman comes and says, these are the systems you have created, which are very predictable for unpredictable outcomes. So for anybody to say that NASA is not ready for a free, fair, and credible election, that's very good propaganda which must be ignored. Actually, the things we are supposed to be addressing is the contents of the Supreme Court judgment. When they said that there were illegalities and irregularities, have they been sorted out? No. Then the Supreme Court had to come to an adverse inference when IBC refused to open up the servers. Right. Because indeed, if IBC had conducted a free, fair, and credible election, they would have no hesitation at all going to the Supreme Court and saying, give us 3 hours so that we can demonstrate to the entire world that in fact we've run a free, fair, and credible election. Now it's taken the action of the DPP to order investigations around that as to why there was that contempt of court. And one would have expected that even both Jubilee and NASA would be addressing the issue of the server. I've not heard anywhere where Jubilee is talking about this server. And Mr. Kavemba says that everybody wants to play by the rules. Now, playing by the rules demands that we open up that server so that we stop going to that server and saying, what is contained in that server? Is there an animal inside that server? And as the two bigger political players keep on holding the country hostage, every other Kenyan wants to move. They want to make progress. Right. Because we cannot allow ourselves to be held hostage by a political class which probably fears going to an election, or they fear losing an election, or they fear the consequences outside that. Right. Because this Kenyan nation is much bigger than President Kenyatta. It's much bigger than Raila Odinga. When you speak to people who want to invest in the country called Kenya, they're saying we are not going to be investing in this nation because we don't know whether or not you guys respect the rule of law and order anymore. Right. The attack on the Supreme Court was uncalled for. Because, people had said that Kenya is a shining example of democracy in Africa. All of a sudden, when you have President Kenyatta attacking the persons of the bench, it's very important to attack the ruling, the judgment, determinations. But now when you start attacking the persons, it's unacceptable. And for young Kenyans who want to make progress, they really don't care who is president, provided the election is free and fair.
All right, I'll let Mutinda answer that. And as you respond to that, Mutinda, on page 6 of the Sunday Standard, the issue of the DPP directing the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission and the police to begin investigation on any criminal activity, emanating from the just concluded election. What's your take? Do you think this is going to yield any results?
First, I have to commend the DPP because in many instances he sometimes fails to come in when he's needed to. I have to commend him for having come in this time because this is how the structure of our constitution is designed. And when one of the key players in this process of law enforcement does not do his job, then we always have a problem with being effective in holding people accountable. So this is commendable that the DPP, and actually what I want to say is this, there is a time that the NASA people wrote a letter about the kind of things they would want done in IBC. We as Jubilee also did the same. And I am one of the people who are not for that kind of approach because now that is politicizing the whole matter in a way that we might not get the truth. The issue is let's give the rule of law and due process a chance. And I think what the DPP has done is a movement towards that direction. Because, this is an era of the 2010 Constitution. We have the Bill of Rights. We have things we call fair administrative action. So you don't just move on anybody without any basis. And what the Director of Public Prosecution has done is towards evidence-based decisions towards who is culpable and who is not culpable. And that's why the relevant arm of government have been told to move in so that they ascertain who should be held responsible and who should not, who should be taken to court, where, in what instances should administrative actions within the IBC suffice, and that is the direction we should go, because NASA is interested, we as Jubilee are interested, and if you're going to listen to what we are saying, we might get lost. IBC is an independent constitutional commission. The best is for them to be guided by the constitution and the rule of law, and I think the direction they've taken, Tobiko has given certain days, which certainly are before we have the next election. So if there are people who are going to be found culpable, they are going to recommend prosecution, and automatically those people are going to have to pave way. And IEBC, I believe it has, within its structures, they've got ready people who are going to step in the positions of the people who are going to be found culpable. That is now the direction that we should all move, so that it is not about what NASA is demanding or about what Jubilee is demanding, but it is about the due process and rule of law, what has been established by evidence. So and that is the direction the DPP has taken.
So the DPP has indicated that he received letters from NASA lawyers, ATL Lodge, Kura Yangu, Sauti Yangu Initiative, and the Jubilee Party, which wants NASA co-principal Musalia Mudavadi and James Orengo investigated. Mheshimiwa, do you think, is this the right direction according to what NASA is demanding?
Maybe before I comment on this, I just want to talk about our being readiness for elections. And I want you to look at the actions of Jubilee vis-a-vis the actions of NASA. Jubilee keep on saying, these guys of the Wembe ni ule ule. The Wembe ni ule ule is, the mistakes that we have actually seen. And that's why we are saying, before they come with their Wembe, we want to ensure that at least the environment is actually set. The Wembe ni ule ule narrative that is actually being sold by Jubilee is actually the stealing of elections. That they actually are saying, we are going to do the same things. Because Wembe ni ule ule, what actually happened has actually led to a nullification of presidential elections. And they're saying we want to go back to the same. And you would hear, some of my fellow legislators, my colleagues, I'm told next week they want to bring motions to parliament to try and amend the election laws and all those other things. And we're wondering, why are you so quick to go and amend the election laws where there is no problem? The court did not talk about the election laws. We are talking about the problems of the IBC. So in terms of being ready, I think we are actually more ready. If anything, we are the ones who are not in government. We want to be in government sooner than we want to be in government yesterday. So we actually...
I mean, from the other elective positions where they seem to be having dominance.
I actually wanted to inform. I wanted to take this opportunity to inform him what Wembe ni ule ule means, so that you don't misinform the public.
But this dominance you're talking about, in the record of this country, today we are having close to 300 petitions. We are having close to 300 petitions, without even going into the merits of the cases in court. But the sheer number indicates to you how dissatisfied the people actually are. That's an indication. So I don't want to talk about, in about 6 months, we will know about who has more numbers in Parliament and Senate. So to know, as of now, it's actually immature to actually talk about. Yeah. So Wembe ni ule ule, just hold on. The Wembe ni ule ule is, they want the same infrastructure where they can be able to manipulate, where Chir can get into the server from any other point. That is the Wembe ni ule ule. And we're saying, change that infrastructure so that we go into a free and fair. Now, the other action I want you to look at, I have been seeing on telly, many a times, Jubilee hosting delegations from all over parts of the country. But look at the areas they're inviting people from. Northeastern, where we actually think and have reasons to believe that they actually stole the elections. So look at, they're going to Eastern. They are going to Western Kenya. They are going, they're the ones, we are ready. We are not, the other day you heard our principal say, campaigns were over. We have told Kenyans the agenda for NASA. We are actually waiting for an election. These guys, they keep on going on. Whatever. Now, but back to the issue of DPP. And,
all right. Can we let Mutinda Kavemba, in all fairness, so he can respond?
On the Wembe ni ule ule. The Wembe ni ule ule, whatever he's saying is very misinforming. The truth of the matter is that this decision is going to be by the electorate. It doesn't matter how many other things we do in between here. It will boil down to the electorate. And when it boils down to the electorate, the votes will be counted and Jubilee will emerge the winner. That is what we mean. It is clear about that. That it doesn't matter all these other things that are being brought. The only way we are going to have someone in State House, as per the Constitution, is by the electorate deciding. And that is the only way That is what we mean by Wembe ni ule ule, that it has to be us. And when we get back to that, the votes will again be counted and Jubilee will emerge the winner. That is the Wembe ni ule ule.
To that extent, I actually agree with him.
Yeah.
To that extent, I actually agree with him. That, the electorate have to really decide.
Before I go to
Exactly.
Hesbon, you say that NASA already sold their agenda. They're just waiting for the elections. Do you mean that you're not going to campaign?
No, we are actually just going to, as is normal, we will go back to the campaigns to just inform people. But I mean, we are not in a panic because Kenyans themselves, even before the campaigns, are tired of the Jubilee government.
Hesbon, what do you think about this?
I think just in response to what Kavemba and Mheshimiwa have said, in the issue of Wembe ni ule ule, I mean, when we focus on numbers without looking at the systems, the process, and the procedures, then you're going to lose it again. And I think that is the impression that Wembe ni ule ule, elicits among many people. That when you say Wembe ni ule ule, and then we don't have these reforms, there is a likelihood that we'll get the same numbers that again will be vacated. And it is clear that, we are not looking for who will win the election. We are looking for the person who will win the election in a free, fair and credible election. And therefore the systems are very important, much more important than the date, So I don't see the worry in Jubilee or anyone if NASA is not campaigning, because there is no point of campaigning if you're going to be taken through the same systems. You'd rather focus on ensuring that infrastructure is regularized adequately to meet the threshold that will give Kenyans a free and fair election.
I would agree with Esbon if it is IEBC that had a slogan saying Wembe ni ule ule. If it is IEBC that had come out with a slogan saying Wembe ni ule ule, I would agree with his way of looking at it. It is Jubilee saying Wembe ni ule ule. It is Jubilee was not found culpable. The third respondent clearly was not found culpable or guilty of anything. So when his team says Wembe ni ule ule, they are talking from their point of view. So if there is anybody who messed up the election, as per the court ruling, it is IEBC. So if IEBC was insisting on Wembe ni ule ule, they would be worried.
So what Mutinda is saying,
yes,
they have a right to have their slogan.
Exactly.
Yes, they have a right to have their slogan.
And it does not
but you see,
in any way
there
mean that it is the IEBC slogan.
Ben, there are two things here. They have a right to have their slogan, but they don't have a right to frustrate the processes that will regularize this system that gave us a product, through a flawed system. So if the system is cleared, then we can wait for Wembe ni ule ule. As a matter of fact, for many Kenyans, it is not a question of who is going to win.
You know what my friend is forgetting? Is that the Wembe ni ule ule. In this election, we have seen the Jubilee chief agent, Davis Chirchir, allegedly accessing the servers through an unauthorized, accessing the servers. So what we are talking about, Wembe ni ule ule, they want the infrastructure that way, so it can be accessed from whatever.
You mean you've not heard you've not heard that Honorable Orengo? No, on that point before you move. You mean you've not heard that Honorable Orengo and Honorable Mudavadi are also accused of having done whatever you are accusing
all these things are under
That's why we need to wait for the DPP.
Under investigation.
I want to talk about the letter from the DPP. I think the DPP has, I also want to commend the DPP with the speed with which he has moved. I was actually there when the petition was presented on Friday for him to move in to investigate specific officials within IEBC. What we actually need to see now is specific individuals under investigations, active investigations, stepping down because they are likely to interfere with the process of investigations within IEBC. And that starts from Chiloba, and all the other guys listed. They need to step aside, and they should not be, at any point, be involved during this time that they're under active investigations in the preparation of the next elections.
All right.
That's where it begins.
This must, before you move on, I have the last word. Do you think this investigation that the DPP has called for will yield any results that will be, desirable for NASA especially?
In my view, what the DPP is doing is good for the 2022 general election, not for this general election. He's given the CID and EACC 21 days. Now, these 21 days, you don't know whether they're actually 21 working days. Because if you're counting Monday through Friday without Saturday and Sunday, the investigation will be done maybe a day or two before the election. And then you'll have those files, and he'll say, give me 2 or 3 weeks to peruse through these documents. And maybe the earliest time he'll go to court is probably in December. So at this particular stage, the investigation will not help anybody. And again, it would be very naive of us to expect that because you are under investigation, then you step down. Because
what will help?
What would help is a bipartisan meeting. The buck stops with Mr. Chebukati, Raila Odinga, and President Kenyatta to sit down with the help of their legal advisors, identify those illegalities, irregularities, do a quick audit and sort it out. Because these investigations are going to take long. What if the director of CID and the EACC, they give files, and in his wisdom, Keriako Tobiko says, there's not sufficient evidence. Please go review this again. You'll end up having people being taken to court next year in June. So at this stage, it's not going to assist anybody. But it's very clear that the bench has pointed out, like for instance, if you're declaring results without the benefits of Forms 34A, that is very basic. You don't require any investigation. Anybody who has gone to school of law will understand there's a mistake. So what we need is, number one, in my view, a special audit, and one would have expected IBC to have done that special audit to identify the challenges, right, and an audit of that server, so that the issues are quickly sorted out right now. And for me, I do not understand the challenges that Jubilee has in asking for a clean IBC. I don't understand the challenges that NASA would have in even working to reduce on their bare minimums. Like for instance, when you speak to ICT experts, they say within the 4-week duration, the probability of you getting a new ICT supplier who will be able to deliver this election in a manner that is efficient is almost zero. But IBC says that we are opening up our ICT infrastructure. Why can't Jubilee appoint 2 sharp guys in IT? Have the same with NASA, have the same with observers, actually indeed any interested party. So all of them audit that process with the ICT supplier to identify any loopholes. When they're happy with the system, they identify a third party, an international player, to come and do quality assurance so that we go to an election. Because right now, there's a very high probability, and this is just an issue of probability, that Jubilee fears if they go to this election, they lose. There's also a very high probability that NASA fears if they go to this election, they will lose. So the two of them would like to hold the nation hostage because they fear some embarrassment at some stage. But at the end of the day, who is really shedding tears is the normal citizen. When you look at the political class, and Mheshimiwa is one of them, he's already at the National Assembly, and in the next few days, he's going to be earning his 600,000. But majority of Kenyans are here stuck, they're not moving anywhere. The political class in Kenya are the ones who control the factors of production. Most of them anticipated that we are going to have a crisis. Right. So for them, they've got enough savings. But poor Wanjiko is now beginning to wallow in poverty.
All right, let's leave it there in terms of the political pages. I suspect we'll be speaking about these issues later on. Of course, we'll be speaking about the detailed judgment given by the 6 judges of the Supreme Court, the majority vote as well as the dissenting voice, the dissenting views. We shall be analyzing that shortly, and later on shall be discussing about Kenya's preparedness, or the IEBC's preparedness for the election that, as of now, it will be held on the 26th of October. Don't go too far. You're watching Sunday edition here on KTN News.